If your autistic child sometimes struggles with tasks that should be easy, things like getting dressed, brushing teeth, starting homework, leaving the house, this video is about what to do in those moments without turning every scenario into a battle. I'm going to start with what to do, what actually works, and then I'll explain why it works to make it easier for you to generalize. The most common instinct that parents have when an easy task goes sideways is to push harder. We repeat ourselves, we add urgency, we say things like, "You know how to do this," or "This shouldn't be such a big deal." That reaction is understandable, but it usually makes these moments harder, not easier. The first shift that helps is, instead of focusing on follow-through, focus instead on lowering the cost of getting started. When starting feels safer and less expensive, follow-through comes much more naturally. Let me give you an example that really captures this. I worked with a parent whose son is genuinely brilliant, especially in math. He tests years above his chronological age, and yet, at the end of the night, when it's time to brush his teeth, he simply couldn't do it. His mom was stuck in a very real bind. On the one hand, she worried that if she kept helping him, he'd never learn to do it independently. On the other hand, by the end of the day, she was completely out of steam too, which made it much harder for her to stay patient and calm. The solutions we talked about weren't about lowering expectations. It was about lowering the cost of getting started and then fading that support over time. So instead of asking, "Why can't he just do this?" we asked, "What's the smallest amount of help that would help him get started?" For him, that meant just walking to the bathroom, or handing him the toothbrush, or putting toothpaste on it, or staying nearby while he began. The goal wasn't to do it for him. It was to give just enough support to get past the hardest part, the initiation. Over time, and as his system had more capacity, those supports naturally faded. Independence didn't come from pressure. It came from scaffolding that matched the moment. Another example was a young lady whose job it was to empty the dishwasher, and she had done it 100 times. And yet there were times when she'd be asked to empty it, and she just froze. She couldn't get the job done. And in that case, her parents just had to sometimes walk over with her and open the dishwasher. Even that little bit of executive function support would help her get started. And when she got started, she could complete what was for her an easy task in the end. Here's how to apply this thinking more broadly, not as tricks, but as ways of responding. As we talked about, lower the cost of starting. Support the first step, not the whole task. A second approach is to support transitions explicitly. Stopping one thing to start another can be hard, so previewing, countdowns, or even naming what's next can reduce friction. Third, reduce uncertainty. Let your child know how long this will take, what happens after, when they'll be done. Uncertainty quietly raises the difficulty of almost everything. Fourth, stay as regulated as possible and let your child share that regulation. Fewer words, slower tone, less urgency. These responses aren't permissive, they're precise. Now let's talk briefly about why this works, because once you see the full picture, these responses stop feeling counterintuitive. So here's another example that brings it all together. A parent told me that her daughter could write pages of creative stories beautifully, effortlessly, but when it came time to start homework, she completely shut down. The assumption was, if she could write like that, she could obviously do this. But when we took a deeper look, the difference was clear. The creative writing had high interest, no clear endpoint, and no external evaluation. Homework, on the other hand, had low interest, a time limit, uncertainty about expectations, including a fear of being corrected. Same child, very different neurological cost. So when the mom helped reduce the uncertainty, previewed the assignment, named the stopping point, and stayed nearby for the first few minutes, starting became possible. Not perfect, but workable. The issue was never effort, it was access. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you've heard me talk about cumulative load, the way autistic kids spend enormous energy holding it together across the day. And if you're new here, this is an important foundation. Sensory input, social pressure, transitions, and constant self-regulation quietly drain capacity long before you ask for what should be the easy thing. Autistic kids experience difficulty based on executive function demand, transition cost, emotional and sensory load, interest, uncertainty. So by the time you ask for the easy task, especially at the end of the day, you might be asking for the hardest kind of work, initiation, at the moment when capacity is lowest. Even if we're talking about something like getting ready for school in the morning, that involves executive function. There might be anxiety about entering school or about an assignment. There are all kinds of reasons why something that should be easy for your child sometimes isn't. And they might need a little extra support sometimes that they don't always need. This is why pushing harder usually backfires. Pressure pushes on the exact skills that are already offline: initiation, flexibility, and regulation. Pressure doesn't create capacity, it just exposes where capacity isn't available yet. It doesn't mean that the expectation is wrong, it just means that support needs to match the moment. When easy tasks are consistently hard, it's rarely about unwillingness, despite what it might look like. It's about how much work is happening beneath the surface and how expensive starting feels in the moment. The fact that you're noticing this pattern already tells me you're paying close attention, and that's the starting point for real change. If you want help figuring out what to support and when, that's exactly the kind of work I do in my coaching program. I work with a small number of families to help them achieve the kind of home life they want, peace in the family, and tremendous progress for their children. I'd love to hear in the comments, what is one of those tasks that you think should be easy for your child that you find surprisingly difficult sometimes? I hope this was helpful. If it was, I hope you'll consider subscribing and drop a like, share it with other parents who may need this message, and I'll see you in the next video.